The 2024 NFL Draft is over, and the Panthers filled several of their glaring needs heading into the draft, but not all of those needs. What are the remaining needs of the Panthers post-draft? I'll tell you right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, the part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm right here on the show answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. I just want to start off today's show by thanking every single one of y'all who tuned in this past weekend for the live shows on YouTube and who went back and listened to all those shows on the podcast feed. A busy weekend with the draft going on in Detroit. So I'm really appreciative of everybody who's taken the time to watch or listen to the show, because if y'all didn't do it, I would just be some idiot doing a podcast for nobody. And you may still think I am some idiot doing a podcast, but at least I'm an idiot that you're viewing. So I really appreciate, seriously, everybody who's gone out there and has viewed the podcast. I'm going to continue to have more stuff ongoing throughout the entirety of May coming up as we continue to look at the draft and we head into OTAs. It's going to be at the end of the month, and then we have mandatory minicamp in June, and things will be a little bit slower as when we get to June, we'll have 3 shows a week. And for folks who are new, the concept of Locked On, this is not Julian Council who came up with this. This is Locked On's concept, 5 shows a week. And then once we get to the offseason mode, which is in June and July, 3 shows a week. I didn't come up with it. They came up with it. So if you want to complain about there being too many shows, I don't really know what to tell you other than it's not your boy who came up with that. But anyways, let's get into what the Panthers did this past weekend and what really they didn't do this past weekend. Certainly many reasons to be excited about the draft picks that they made, but also there are some things that leave you wanting from this past weekend. And let's go over a couple of positions that I'm looking at that still have not been addressed here in Carolina. The number one that I think everyone has been thinking about after this weekend is outside corner. Yes, they brought in Dane Jackson, someone who was a 7th-round pick in Buffalo, who's been their 3rd corner the last couple of years. Dan Morgan was banging on the table 4 years ago for him to be selected out of Pitt to go to Buffalo. Great pickup for the Panthers to get someone that Morgan likes, but someone who also has starting experience and is a younger player as he's entering into his 2nd contract, and also an inexpensive player. I like that signing, but it's not like Dane Jackson is going to be considered one of the top corners available this past free agency. He's not. He is a solid player, a good rotational corner, and someone who potentially could be ready to start. I don't know if that's what you're going to want to have once the season begins with him and JC starting. And also understand this. If it is Dane Jackson and JC Horn as the 2 starting corners, that's all well and good, but the Panthers need more depth. We have seen over the last couple of seasons, JC Horn has struggled to stay healthy. Good for him that he got his 5th-year option exercise, even though he's missed 29 out of possible 51 games in his first 3 seasons as a Carolina Panther, and really no fault of his own. It's football. Things happen. It's not like it's been a lot of muscle injuries. Now, last year was a hamstring, so you can wonder why that was the case. It happened. It's unfortunate. JC's here for this season and next season, and they need to add more depth and insurance, really, in case JC Horn goes down with an injury, because at this point in time, you cannot sit here and honestly believe that he's going to play all 17 games for you. So the player I think a lot of us are looking for to play at that outside corner position is Stephon Gilmore. It seems like a very easy call. He's right down the street from Dan Morgan. Literally has been here in Charlotte before. He's at the tail end of his career, so you have to wonder, does he want to just play for his hometown team, especially knowing that Jadeveon Clowney's here. J.C. Horn is also a South Carolina alum as well. Plenty of them on that defensive unit. Or is he wanting to go elsewhere? Like last year, spent his time in Dallas and play for a contender. Possibly the Panthers, after this free agency period and the draft, have turned themselves into contender in the NFC South. I'm quite skeptical that is the case, but outside corner remains a starting need. And I would really say starting corner remains a need for the Panthers. Got to add at least another guy there on the outside to pair with JC and Dane Jackson. The number 2 need that I think the Panthers still have is backup center. My hope was going into the draft, they were going to draft someone who could come in and compete with Austin Corbett for the starting center position in Carolina in 2024. Jackson Powers-Johnson was sitting there with pick 39. Carolina opted to trade back instead to 52. Then when they traded up to 46, he was already gone, and they were also interested in drafting a running back in Jonathan Brooks. Zach Frazier of West Virginia was also on the board where the Panthers decided to take Jonathan Brooks. I would have loved to have seen them take either one of those players, have them come in, compete with Austin Corbett rather, and end up being the solution there at center for the Panthers long term. They have tried Matt Paradis. He did not play well enough for Carolina. They tried Pat Elflein. He did not play well enough. Bradley Bozeman played well until he didn't last season. Now it's Austin Corbett. Now, Dan Morgan, first question he got was from Mike Lissette of Fox 46 on Saturday afternoon after the NFL draft wrapped up, and he asked him about not getting a center, and Dan Morgan had this to say: they feel really good about Austin Corbett at center. He mentioned that Brady Christensen has been getting snaps at center as well, and if you recall, back when Matt Rule was here in Carolina, his rookie year, that Brady Christensen's rookie year, he talked about Brady can play all 5 offensive line positions. He can play guard, he can play tackle, he can also play center. So this is not the first time that we've heard Brady Christensen potentially playing at the center position. So right now, it appears that he is the backup center in Carolina. They feel comfortable with that pairing. Dan Morgan also went on to say they'll always be looking to challenge their roster. They're not going to close the door on bringing someone else as well. And now looking at it, there are some players available that are veteran centers out there on the market. Overthecap.com has several of them that are still out there on the market. I look at Nick Gates from the Commanders. He's 29 years old. He could make sense. Mason Cole, who started for the Steelers, 28. Brian Allen for the Rams. There's a relationship with Austin Corbett already built in there. Also of a large portion of this coaching staff. Connor McGovern from the Jets. He's still available. Tyler Larson, an old name. I don't think he would be the one that you would want. He's available. There are some veteran centers available. If they don't go and get a veteran center right now or before training camp, the next logical point in time where you would expect Carolina to decide to actually do something about that position, aside from just maneuvering some guys that are already in the current room on the offensive line, would be after roster cutdown day. That's when we saw them bring in Calvin Throckmorton last year to start at guard for them for the time being until Austin Corbett is ready to go. So I would think that if they don't add one of those veterans I just mentioned, and there's some other ones out there as well, then probably roster cutdown day in late August would be the next time you would see them bring in a center, and that guy would be brought in to be the backup. It looks like Austin Corbett's going to be the starter. Brady Christensen for now is going to be the backup center. And if something happens to either one of those guys, I don't know what their third center plan is right now in Carolina. There's a lot of teams across the league that don't really have a plan C if anything happens to their plan A or plan B. And the third one, probably not as serious for a lot of fans out there, but I was thinking about this: a veteran backup quarterback to be QB3. Going into the draft, Joe Person of The Athletic reported that the thought process there on who would be the third quarterback in Carolina had changed a little bit. When it comes to Dave Canales and his coaching staff, they wanted to potentially go draft a quarterback late in the draft, either in the 6th or 7th round. They did not do that, as we know. Instead, it looks like maybe they're going to target a veteran, and that appeared to be what they wanted to do. Dave Canales talked about that at the owners' meetings down in Orlando, that they wanted to use that third spot, which was not utilized last year by Frank Reich and the coaching staff in Carolina. They wanted to utilize it on a veteran. And I still feel like that is the best scenario for the team heading into this year. You have Andy Dalton here. And certainly, I can understand there's fans out there who's told me, oh, why don't you go get like Spencer Rattler because of his relationship with Xavier Legette, or why don't you just get a quarterback and have them be the backup to Bryce once Andy Dalton leaves? Even when Dalton leaves, I want Carolina to have an experienced backup. The hope is that you never play that third quarterback. Even if they're a developmental player, you never want them to play. And if you get to the point where Bryce is successful and that person ends up being the backup, they may have never played a single snap in the NFL, and you may be asking them to go out there and to play it. There's plenty of examples of players who are starting quarterbacks like Bryce Young, who had never played a single snap until they were asked to do it. The difference is Bryce went number 1 overall. Typically, those players have gone in the first round. It's not like it's a backup who's been around. And Tyson Bagent last year for Chicago, I suppose, is an example, one of those guys you did not expect to play, who ended up playing. I want a veteran backup behind Bryce. I want someone who's actually played NFL snaps even when Andy Dalton departs the building. And looking at some guys that are still available right now, I mean, Ryan Tannehill, he's available. He's 36, though. Teddy Bridgewater's retired, so he's no longer available. Brian Hoyer's 39. Blaine Gabbert, I guess if he's still giving it a go. I don't know if he is. AJ McCarron's out there. Trevor Siemian, he's still available. I think he actually is someone who's still trying to play football for whatever reason. I'm looking and seeing that PJ Walker is still available. There aren't great options, if we're being honest with ourselves, as far as that third quarterback. So it may make more sense for Carolina to get someone to be a backup who's a rookie and work on them like a UDFA. And they did bring in a quarterback who's an undrafted free agent, and Jack Plummer out of Louisville. We get into the list of UDFAs that have been announced so far later on here on the show. So there may be some value in that, having another quarterback to groom. Just my thought is down the line, you would want to have a veteran behind Bryce Young, assuming that Bryce ends up showing he is, in fact, your franchise quarterback. And if anything happens to him, I'd rather a player who's actually played meaningful snaps opposed to someone who is not. And much like center, if they're not going to address it with a veteran now, the best time to do it is roster cut down days, when there will be some guys who played well in the preseason who then earn a spot as a third quarterback or maybe a backup elsewhere in the NFL. So there are the remaining needs for the Panthers right now. Need a starting corner, need a center, potentially. I think they still should get someone who's at least played center in the NFL. Christensen and Corbin have not, and got to get that third quarterback, even though you hope they never play. Now, speaking of a starting corner, who should it be? Well, we all know, Stephon Gilmore. It's time, Dan Morgan, to walk down the street and get a deal done. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. We've all been there before, either as a player or as a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists and take as much of my friends' money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. Make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks of a wrecking ball. Charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Sitting at pick 39 on Friday night, the Panthers had a choice to make. Were they going to stay put and draft Cooper DeJean out of Iowa or Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama? Were they going to take a center and take Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon or Zach Frazier out of West Virginia? They opted to trade back, then trade back up and get a running back. They did not fill a need that we all felt like was a big need there in the second round. They got wide receivers start off the first round after trading up from 33 to 32 to take Xavier Legette out of South Carolina, and none of us can disagree with them getting a wide receiver, and hard to disagree with them effectively swapping a fifth for a sixth in order to get the fifth-year option, which you may value more than I do, but the Panthers clearly think it's a good thing to have for a receiver who they hope will end up being a long-term playing partner with Bryce Young and someone that they'll have to pay big money to down the road, which means they'll be able to save some money for the next 5 years if they do utilize that fifth-year option with Xavier Legette. So they cross off that box, the one I wanted to see crossed off first. But the two other boxes that I really wanted to see crossed off just didn't get crossed off, quite honestly, this weekend. They did not get a center, They did not get a starting corner, and now they're sitting here needing to find a starting center or corner, rather, more than a center. Austin Corbett, he's going to lock down the center spot for the time being, and at least it seems like this season, long term, what's it going to look like? I don't know, but cornerback, my God, corner, that's where Carolina really needs to be looking to get somebody before they start training camp. In my opinion, it's time to go ahead and figure things out with Stephon Gilmore, who has played here in Carolina before, who lives right down the street to Dan Morgan and has great friends like Jadeveon Clowney on the team right now. He may not be the missing piece in terms of this team being a playoff team and not a playoff team, but he certainly is the missing piece to the secondary in the cornerback room as they need another starting caliber corner, and he would fit the mold there. Dan Morgan was asked about this on Saturday when he was reacting who they selected on day 4. And we know they took Chau Smith-Wade, the defensive back out of Washington State. He's versatile. That was a key word that's been used throughout the draft process by Dave Canales this past weekend. He wanted versatility on offense and all over the roster, and they got versatility in Chau Smith-Wade. He can play the nickel spot. He can play as a safety, which is great. Even can play outside potentially, but it appears that the real focus for him is going to be at nickel and potentially being the replacement for Troy Hill once he departs Carolina, likely after the 2024 season. They did not, though, get an outside corner. Dan Morgan asked about that. He said, first off, we're really excited about Chau. He can play inside. He can play outside. So we liked his versatility. He's good on special teams. I think he's a guy that can really contribute and make us better. I think obviously at every position, we're going to look to improve, not just the corner position. But again, we're going to try to create depth and competition everywhere. And as far as Stephon goes, we're not going to close the door on anything, and we'll continue to talk and explore and see where that goes. So they're going to continue to talk and explore and see where things go, and not close the door on anything. The door should be wide open. And my first reaction when Carolina brought in Chau Smith-Wade and listening to Daniel Jeremiah on the draft broadcast, it was, this did not close the door on Stephon Gilmore. This is a player who can play outside if you need or inside, but he's not the biggest player. I know he's listed at 5'11", but I think they had him on NFL Network at 5'9", and that's just not an outside corner in the NFL sitting there at 5'9". They need some length, and that has been, when you think back to the time when Scott Fitter was here in Carolina, which is not that long ago, they really valued length on the outside at corner. That was based off of what they had and guys like Richard Sherman for that period of time with the Legion of Boom in Seattle, and J.C. Horn certainly fit that. C.J. Henderson, while not being a good player, he fit that. Keith Taylor as well fit that. Those two guys are gone. J.C.'s still here. They brought in Dane Jackson, and I would think Dan Morgan's been in Seattle. He's worked under Scott Fitter here in Carolina as well. That may be something that they continue to look at, and a player like TJ Tampa out of Iowa State would have made sense. Of course, Kool-Aid McKinstry, as we talked about, Cooper DeJean, who's a great athlete, would have made a lot of sense as well. And that was not their priority in the second round. Their priority was running back. I didn't think it would be running back, but it was running back, a position that we looked at as not being one that needed to be addressed that early. But clearly, when they talk about what they need out of running back in this offense, it was a big need for Dave Canales and his offensive coaching staff. I didn't think it would be a big need, but for them, it was. And they continue to say that they like Miles Sanders. They have a plan for him. I don't know what that plan for him here in Carolina is, but I'm sure there's a plan for him to get out of Carolina that we'll find out in due time. But Stephon Gilmore, I think he's the right guy for the job. Being local obviously helps. Having a relationship with the Panthers previously, that helps. Dan Morgan, his first year in Carolina, Stephon Gilmore was here when they traded for him the same day where the Patriots said, we're going to cut Stephon Gilmore. I was stunned that Carolina decided that a former defensive player of the year who, yes, was coming off an injury and was going to miss some time when they traded for him. I was stunned that this team was aggressive in that manner to go get a player of Stephon Gilmore's caliber. He only played in 8 games in 2021. The first 5, he was on a pitch count, barely played. Then once he was ready to go, and that was a conversation that he had with former defensive coordinator Phil Snow at the time about when he would be ready. He would let him know, hey, I'm ready to go. I'm full go. And he was only full go for 3 games before getting injured and still found a way to be a Pro Bowler that season somehow. That just shows you kind of how the Pro Bowl works, and also the reputation that Stephon Gilmore has and the kind of player that he has been and still is. Looking at the past 2 seasons, in Indianapolis and Dallas, he's played and started in 33 games. He played in the playoffs last year in that embarrassing game the Cowboys played against the Packers. Surprise, surprise, Dallas choked again in the playoffs, but he was good all season long for them. He was healthy, played all 17 games, and in Indianapolis only missed one game. For a player who had injuries in 20 and in 21 to go through 22 and 23 and be healthy like that, that's big for his CV heading into a season where I believe he's 33 right now, going to be 34 at some point in time this year. And you just look at just his talent as well. He was 35th rated corner according to Pro Football Focus, which would have been ahead of everybody else on the roster, of course, last year. But his pass breakups, 24 pass breakups the past two seasons in Indy and in Dallas. Last year, he had 13. Looking at the corners that are returning on the roster, Troy Hill led all Panther corners with 16. That's according to Pro Football Reference. To have 24 over the past two seasons, 13, more than double what the top returning corner in Carolina, and that's just based off of the stat here. JC, as we know, is the top returning corner, just didn't play a lot last year. That would be a big upgrade. I think it's time to get Stephon Gilmore. Again, I don't think that he is going to be what keeps the Panthers out of the playoffs. They don't bring him in. I still don't think it's going to be a playoff team. I'm excited to see the build this year, to see Bryce develop, to see what some of these young playmakers like Leggett and Brooks and Sanders can do. Excited to see this new offensive line. And having an offensive line with Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis there in the interior, and Corbett, we'll see how it looks like. I can't imagine he's going to be terrible as a center. He wasn't bad at guard. I'm sure there's going to be a learning curve there, but he's a good player. We know that. Icky, he needs to be better, obviously, and the hope is he will be better. If he's not, that's going to certainly limit the potential. But bringing in Yosh Nijman, rather, that helps the Panthers at tackle. Taylor Moton's back with the O-line likely better, and the dedication to run the football. And that's Carolina Panthers football, man. Running the ball, playing defense. If they're able to run the ball, control the line of scrimmage, they're not going to be a 2-15 team. They might not be a playoff team, but that's going to have you competitive. And they could not consistently do that last year, as we know. Defensively, I have my concerns on the defensive line of scrimmage outside of Derek Brown and other spots in that defense, primarily right now, like we're having a conversation at corner, due to health and due to talent and sort of lack thereof as far as depth goes at that outside corner spot. Getting Stephon Gilmore can help that. He's probably the one missing piece when you look at starters on this roster that have you feeling comfortable. I don't know if you're going to feel confident in the roster as a whole, and maybe you do. I need to see them do it first before I'm going to have any confidence in the Panthers as being a contender. But as far as knowing that they have professionals at every spot that can start, I'm not there yet, but Stephon Gilmore would get me there. So yeah, call him, Dan. All right, so corner, center, we'll see how that works out over the next coming weeks and months as the Panthers prepare for training camp at the end of July and, of course, the 2024 season in September. They didn't just add 7 more players via the draft this week, and they also have added some undrafted free agents. Let's take a look at some of those players and who may find his way onto the 53 in August here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. And Suns fans, my God, you got swept. You gave all that money to KD. You brought in Brad Beal. You got swept by the Timberwolves. And by the way, basketball gods, why can't you do that for me? Why can't my Hornets, who I don't even want to comment on this show a lot of times, because it's Panthers podcast, why can't the Hornets be what the Timberwolves have become? Why? Got to be healthy, of course. But if you're a Suns fan or a fan of any team in the NBA that's no longer around, it's okay. Just bet whatever you want to put down, and you win, great. You lose, $150. It's that easy. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. And what are you waiting for? If you're in North Carolina, March 11th, that's as long as we've had it. Why have you not signed up? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The Panthers welcomed in 7 new players via the draft this past weekend in Detroit, but it does not stop there. They have more players they're adding currently as they fill out their 90-man roster ahead of training camp. Not in Spartanburg, unfortunately, but here In Uptown Charlotte on Cedar Street, right by Bank of America Stadium, they've decided to sign some UDFAs, some undrafted free agents for the uninitiated to come in here and potentially make the roster, but of course, help them practice and make this team as good as it can be heading into 2024. Looking at the Charlotte Observer, these are the players that have been reported to have signed an undrafted free agent deal with the Carolina Panthers. Virginia State cornerback Willie Drew, Missouri kicker Harrison Mevis, Connecticut linebacker Jackson Mitchell, West Virginia wide receiver, also former NC State wide receiver Devin Carter, Coastal Carolina DB Clayton Isbell, Colorado edge rusher Derek McClendon, the second Holy Cross wide receiver Jalen Coker, Oklahoma center Andrew Rahm, Louisville quarterback Jack Plummer, Coastal Carolina wide receiver Sam Pinckney, and the Monmouth running back Jaden Sheardon. So there we go. Those are the current reported undrafted free agents. I will give you the official list, and we'll know it by next weekend. That's when they're going to have mandatory minicamp, not mandatory, but rookie minicamp in Carolina. So get some reports on what the rookie class looks like and what these guys look like. A real fun weekend for all with rookie minicamp a week away here in Carolina. Now, last year, we spent a lot of time obsessing over Bumper Pool. I was one who thought, hey, Bumper Pool, linebacker, Brandon Smith probably not going to be on the roster. He could have a chance to make it here in Carolina. It was a tackling machine at Arkansas, but couldn't stay healthy and did not make the roster here in Carolina. I don't even know he's on a roster anywhere in the NFL. Rajon Wright of Last Chance U fame. I think the one in Kansas. Never watched that one. I'm a scuba boy, so I did not watch the one out there in Kansas. Rajon Wright, people thought he would make the roster, and he did not make the roster. So we did not see a single undrafted free agent make the roster last year. Does not mean that cannot happen this season, as this is a brand new coaching staff as far as the offensive side of the ball, and Dan Morgan has taken over as the head of personnel, as the general manager and president of football operations here in Carolina. A couple guys I'm looking at. I'll start off with Jack Plummer. He is an interesting story. He started off his career at Purdue, and then he went to Cal as a transfer, then followed Jeff Brom, who was his head coach at Purdue, to Louisville last year. They ended up being the number 2 team in the ACC, played an ACC title game here in Uptown Charlotte, Bank of America Stadium, before losing that game to Florida State. He was fine, more of an air raid guy, so I'm very interested to see how he's able to pick up an NFL offense and if he can be able to maybe get that number 3 spot if the Panthers want to find someone to be a developmental guy in that third role. Did not draft one, as I mentioned earlier, but maybe he can make the roster in that way. We'll see. I think they could probably do better. Quite honestly, he's like a 6-year player. And if you're a 6-year, it's my thing too. I know Bo Nix, 5-year guy. I know Michael Penix Jr., because the ACLs is really why he was in college for as long as he was, but a 5-6-year guy. If you are not drafted and you're a 6-year player in college, you're probably not an NFL player. And as we saw, the top guy, two of the top 3 guys who went were 3-year players, Drake May and Caleb Williams. Jaden Daniels took him a while, good player. Obviously, he wouldn't have gone number 2 if he wasn't. I just look at the majority of these quarterbacks that play 6 years in college thanks to the COVID year, and they're not NFL type of guys. Now, Jack Plummer's going to get an opportunity, and we'll see if it works out. I just would rather get a veteran instead. Andrew Rahm out of Oklahoma. He is somebody that'll be interesting to look at, knowing that the Panthers need a backup center who actually has played center, at least in my opinion. A veteran would make sense as well, but they may not go that route. They want to go the route of this. Andrew Rahm started 29 of his 43 career games at OU. At center, he was second team all Big 12 selection in 21 and in 23. And OU has renowned offensive line coach Bill Biedenbaugh. Plenty of quality offensive linemen over the last 20 years have been coached by Bill Biedenbaugh and have gone into the NFL to have success. And it's possible Andrew Rahm would be another one. I would think he's going to get an opportunity to compete for that backup role with Brady Christensen. Like, Christensen's going to be on the roster. I would be surprised if he doesn't make the roster. But he's going to get a chance to compete. Then Christensen will be competing with guys like Cade Mays and Chandler Zavala, who maybe because Dan Morgan was here last year, he'll have a reason to want to keep those guys around, as he was heading up personnel last season under Scott Fitterer. Possibly he's going to be kind of married to those guys, or is he's going to let the coaching staff dictate who stays around and who doesn't. We'll see how that works out. But Andrew Rahm is someone to look after, and it's Rahm. Maybe it's Rahm or Ram. Raym. I don't know how to say his name. Ram. We'll figure it out. He may not be here long enough for it to matter, but I'll have to figure that out at some point in time. Harrison Mevis is another one I'm looking at. I had mentioned him as a potential kicker to take. You go back to last week, the mock draft I did. I took Will Reichard out of Alabama. He now, I believe, is a Minnesota Viking. There was a mini run on kickers late in the 6th round on Saturday, which was just enthralling to watch play out, especially when Kevin O'Connell, the Vikings head coach, went on NFL Network talking about, yeah, we kicked it off. We got the run on kickers going. So fun thing that happened on a long Saturday there in Detroit for the draft. Harrison Mevis, a.k.a. the thick kicker, with 3 C's, by the way, out of Mizzou. Career 83.5% kicker. Okay for college. Pretty good for college, honestly. Not okay, but pretty good. Last year was 24 of 30. Famously made a 61-yard kick versus Kansas State to win that game in Columbia, Mizzou. Good kicker. He's been up and down. He had a 78% kicking back his junior year, so in 2022 was not great. So he's had some ups and downs. Big leg. I think this is good for competition for Eddie Pinheiro. I think Pinheiro is a better kicker, but who knows? Maybe with some better coaching in the NFL, that Harrison Mevis can end up winning the job. I do think getting some competition there would make sense. I also would like to see the Panthers add competition at punter, but Harrison Mevis, he is absolutely someone to watch for the Panthers as they try to figure out who their kicker will be. Pinheiro still should be the clubhouse favorite. Maybe Harrison Mevis can push him. Those are the UDFAs that I'm looking at right now as potential guys who could maybe make the roster come late August. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe and follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm here on the show answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me to get those questions into me now. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole as always, and forever keep pounding. And I'll talk to y'all on Wednesday.